In this episode, we talk about Rahul Gandhi's demand to enact Rohith Vemula Act in Congress-ruled states. We also talk about India's crackdown on Pakistani YouTube channels in the wake of the Pahalgam terror attack. But first, we talk about the resumption of Kailash Mansarovar Yatra after 5 years. Hi, I'm Ichha Sharma, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In a significant step towards normalizing India-China ties since the 2020 border standoff, New Delhi announced last week that it will resume the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra from June this year. The Yatra, which requires pilgrims to enter Chinese territory, holds particular religious significance for Hindus as well as for Jains and Buddhists. The resumption of the Yatra after a 5-year gap is being seen as an important move to rebuild the trust deficit that has persisted since the border clash in Galwan, where 20 Indian soldiers were killed. In this segment, my colleague Shashank Bhargava speaks to the Indian Express's diplomatic affairs editor Shubhajit Roy about this development.
Shubhajit, tell us what makes the resumption of this yatra so significant.
So, after India and China decided to work towards normalizing the relationship almost after a 5-year border standoff, this pilgrimage where Indian pilgrims essentially go to a place in Chinese territory for paying their obeisance, tribute. This particular pilgrimage was on top of India's wish list towards normalization of the relationship. So that is the reason the resumption of the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra is considered to be a kind of a low-hanging fruit, but an important first step towards normalizing the ties between the two countries. Because there are a list of things that need to be done before we can say that, the rapprochement between India and China is finally sort of bearing fruit.
And for those who aren't familiar with this yatra, can you tell us where does it begin and what does it involve?
So there are two ways to get there. One is through Uttarakhand, and that is one of the routes which goes through the Lipulek sort of pass. And the other route is through Nathula, which is in Sikkim. So they have to go to this place called Lake Mansarovar, and it is known locally as Mapam Yomso. It's a high-altitude freshwater lake near Mount Kailash in the Tibetan Autonomous Region. Both the lake, which is at an elevation of 4,600 meters, and the adjoining 6,638-meter high mountain, which sort of Hindus believe and worship it as the home to Lord Shiva, are sacred in 4 religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and the Tibetan Bon region. And hundreds of pilgrims sort of take this arduous trek to the region each year. They generally trek to Lake Mansarovar and then circumambulate the nearby Mount Kailash.
Right, and this yatra is in fact organized by the Ministry of External Affairs itself between the months of June and September, and the spots are also supposed to be limited. But can you tell us how long this yatra takes and who all are eligible for it?
So this journey usually takes between 23 to 25 days and is open to anyone holding Indian passports, displaying medical and physical fitness. All yatris have to go through a medical screening process and have to be between the age of 18 and 70. Typically, the registrations open by April, May every year, and after which a draw of lots would be held to fill the limited slots. And the total cost of the yatra would be sort of anywhere about rupees 2 lakh, 200,000 rupees and above.
And earlier you mentioned how there are these 2 routes to reach Kailash Mansarovar. One is the Lipulek Pass and the other one is the Nathula Pass. Can you tell us what is the main difference between the two?
So the Lipulek Pass route is basically Lipulek Pass lies at an altitude of about 5,000 meters on the border between Uttarakhand and Tibetan Autonomous Region, near the tri-junction with Nepal. And it is considered an ancient passageway between the Indian subcontinent and the Tibetan plateau. And it is the more direct way to get to Mansarovar from India. I mean, as the crow flies distance, if we take the lake is roughly 50 kilometers from the border. But the terrain makes the journey very challenging. So currently the route involves roughly 200 kilometers of trekking, and it has been operational since 1981. The second route is the Nathula Pass route, and the Nathula Pass lies at an altitude of about 4,000 meters on the border between Sikkim and Tibetan Autonomous Region. It is one of the two mountain passes in the region that have connected Sikkim and Tibet since sort of ancient times. And the route to Mansarovar from Nathula is much longer in terms of distance, close to 1,500 kilometers, but it is fully motorable, meaning pilgrims can make it all the way to the lake without any trekking. So they would only need to trek about 35 to 40 kilometers for the circumambulation or going around of Mount Kailash. And this route is sort of a recent route. It became operational only in 2015. There is another route as well, which is the Nepal route. Now, no private operators function on the two official routes. This third route through Nepal, in which is the one which private companies operate. So, in theory, this route has been accessible to Indians since 2023 when China reopened its border with Nepal. But there are a lot of visa and permit restrictions as well as high costs. So, which means that few Indians avail this option.
And Shubhajit, since this yatra is resuming after 5 years, is the MEA expected to face any challenges while organizing it?
So, as you rightly point out, it is being organized after 5 years. So they have done some Reiki, the security forces, but civilians are going there for the first time after 5 years. So, I mean, there is still time. They're trying to figure out if the route is clean, open, if there have been no sort of interruptions on the route. So I think they have done the Reiki, and they're trying to see if the civilians who make the trek, they're able to do it without facing any big challenges. But there are like the weather and the terrain always makes it difficult, and weather is always unpredictable. There are like rains and can be very cold. So the organizers, that is the MEA, they usually ask the pilgrims to be prepared with raincoats and very light backpacks and all of that, and their ponies and everything. But still, things can become challenging for trekkers if the weather turns sort of for the worse or becomes challenging there.
Earlier, you said how, the resumption of this yatra in that sense is a very low-hanging fruit. And there is a long list of things that India wants to accomplish in terms of normalizing the ties between the two nations. Could you talk about what all is on India's list?
So both India and China have sort of set of wish lists. So from Indian side, they want the water sharing data on the transborder rivers, which is basically Brahmaputra is one of the major sort of rivers where China is building the world's biggest dam. So India wants data on that, and whether it will impact the flow on the river where that is coming to India from China. And apart from that, the Chinese side is keen to restart these direct flights and easing of visas between the two countries so that Chinese businessmen can travel to India easily. Chinese tourists can travel. And China also wants investments into India to increase, and China also wants to do more business with India because it's a big market for the Chinese goods and products. So in this kind of a trade war situation with the Americans, China sees that there is a sort of possibility and potential for the Indian market to be an important element in their strategy to, how to deal with the American imposition of tariff. So all in all, these are some of the major elements. But from Indian side, the other big challenge and other big sort of wish list is that they want de-escalation and de-induction of troops along the India-China border, along the line of actual control in the next few months. And that is something is high on agenda because still there are 50,000 troops on those heights who are still there. And India would want those troops to sort of withdrawn from the Chinese side and then also from the Indian side. So that is again another sort of important and tougher to negotiate wish list that India has on its mind.
And could you also give us a brief overview about the attempts that India has made in the recent past to get this accomplished and what the talks have indicated?
So, as you know that, on October 21st last year, India and China decided to disengage in the last two remaining friction points in Depsang and Demchok. And after that, on 23rd of October, just 2 days later, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping, they met in Russia, in Kazan, on the sidelines of the BRICS summit. And they sort of decided to take steps towards normalizing the ties. And subsequent to that, Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar met his counterpart, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and Defense Minister Rajnath Singh also met his counterpart, the Chinese counterpart. And after that, the Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, he traveled to Beijing to meet his counterpart as special representative on boundary talks to meet Wang Yi, who doubles as foreign minister as well as the special representative on the Chinese side. And they continued carry forward those discussions. And then in January this year, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri also traveled to Beijing and met his counterpart in the Chinese Foreign Ministry. And after that, there have been a series of talks between officials and experts. And finally, they have been able to come to an agreement which enabled the resumption of the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra.
And next, moving away from international corridors, we take a look at Rahul Gandhi's push for a new anti-discrimination law. Earlier this month, leader of the opposition, Rahul Gandhi, wrote to the chief ministers of the three Congress-ruled states, Karnataka, Telangana and Himachal Pradesh, urging them to introduce and implement a new anti-discrimination law. Now, this act, named after Rohith Vemula, seeks to address caste-based discrimination in educational institutions, a commitment the Congress had first made in its manifesto during the 2024 Lok Sabha elections.
Yeah, so Rohith Vemula was a 25-year-old research scholar in University of Hyderabad, which is a central university located in Hyderabad.
This is the Indian Express's Nikhila Henry, who reported on the story for the paper.
So he was somebody who was quite active in student politics, and he was a brilliant student as well. But he died by suicide on January 16th, 2016. And he left behind a suicide note which basically pointed to caste-based discrimination. So he wrote in a suicide note that my birth is my fatal accident, which points to his social location, which according to him was Dalit.
And Nikhila, after Rohith Vemula's death, protests erupted across India. So can you tell us how large this movement became and how widespread the protests were?
Yeah, so in 2016, University of Hyderabad was always a quiet campus, with hardly any student protests happening. But after Rohith Vemula's suicide, the campus literally erupted into protests. So there were hundreds of students who basically gathered at this place called Shopping Complex, which they had named Velivada, which is a Telugu word for a space where outcasts live. So they named this particular place Velivada and started protesting, saying that there is intrinsic or systemic discrimination within University of Hyderabad, because of which this research scholar died by suicide. And they were pointing to caste-based discrimination on campus. And what happened was that it found resonance in several campuses across the country. So there were students in, say, JNU who were protesting. There were students, say, in an IIT Delhi or IIT Bombay who were protesting. IIT Madras who were protesting. There were several campuses, including Osmania University in Hyderabad alone, where students were protesting. So even in small pockets, even in small campuses, there were protests which were held in solidarity with students of University of Hyderabad who were protesting against caste-based discrimination. It was a spark at first, but then it snowballed into a huge protest gathering and protests across the country.
But why is it now that Rahul Gandhi has urged the Congress-ruled states to enact what he is calling a Rohith Vemula Act?
Yeah, so there is a history of this act. So Rohith Vemula Act was something which students had demanded after the suicide of Rohith Vemula, and when the campuses erupted into protests. This was a demand which the students had put forth, saying that we need some sort of a legislation which will protect students coming from Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi communities and also women from discrimination on campuses, especially campuses where higher educational institutions are functional. So the Congress party was, from the very beginning, was one of the parties which had lent support to the student protests on University of Hyderabad campus. In fact, the current leader of opposition in Lok Sabha, Rahul Gandhi, had visited the University of Hyderabad campus soon after the suicide of Rohith Vemula and had spoken to students there. The Congress had lent its unconditional support to the protests there. So now what we have to understand is that it has been almost 10 years since the untimely demise of Mr. Vemula, and Congress has come to a point, or the party is thinking that now is the time to enact the Rohith Vemula Act because his 10th death anniversary is going to come up. Another thing is that the Congress's leader, Priyank Kharge, who's also a minister in Karnataka, basically raised this issue saying that the Rohith Vemula Act should be enacted. So that is the immediate context to it, but it's not something which actually the Congress thought about all of a sudden. They have been part of the protests from the very beginning. So when the Congress's election manifesto for Lok Sabha elections 2024 basically promised that there will be a Rohith Vemula Act if the party is voted to power. But the party did not come to power. However, in states where the Congress government is in power, for example, Telangana, Karnataka, Himachal Pradesh, they would want the act to be enacted before the 10th death anniversary of Rohith Vemula is what I have learned from my sources.
And Nikhila, how does this demand fit into Congress's larger focus on caste justice?
Yeah, so the Congress is a party. This is one of the conversations which I had with a very top leader of the Congress. So I had asked them, what is the ideology of the Congress? And they were quick to respond and say that it is social justice, which is Congress's ideology. So this has been the social justice pitch has been central to the Congress's politics and, how the party wants to project itself, not just in Lok Sabha 2024 elections, but also after they got almost 100 seats in the Lok Sabha, they have been saying that they are taking on people, who are against the Constitution of India, which was drafted by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. So it is a consistent pitch which the Congress is making, saying that we are standing for social justice, because of which enacting Rohith Vemula Act is in line with what they have been thinking in social justice-wise in the past.
Right, and can you tell us what kind of caste-based discrimination would this act seek to prohibit or penalize in the educational institutes?
Yeah, so basically the Rohith Vemula Act, which we are talking about right now, is not what the Congress had come up with, but what a group of students, faculty members and, different members of the civil society had sat together and kind of drafted with the National Commission for Dalit Human Rights, NCDHR, basically anchoring the act. So they have said that caste discrimination is anything which is defined in the Prevention of Scheduled Caste, Scheduled Tribes Atrocities Act, Prevention of Atrocities Act in 1989. And apart from that, they have said that any sort of discrimination, which is either by verbal discrimination, students being not allowed into a class or not being given admission. So it starts right before somebody takes an admission in a college. If you are denied admission based on your caste, if you are given lower marks in your viva, then it constitutes caste discrimination. If you are not given a guide when you are a PhD scholar, then that constitutes caste discrimination. So a gamut of problems which students of historically marginalized marginalized backgrounds had been facing on campuses and still have been facing for quite a long time. The Act basically foregrounded and said that all these things will be categorized under the Rohith Vemula Act and will be considered a penalizable offense.
And you also speak of how the states of Karnataka, Telangana, and Himachal Pradesh are also planning to draft their own versions of the law. So, can you tell us how would that come into play?
Yeah, so each of the Congress ruled states will now have to sit and kind of draft the legislation. And from what I understand from my sources in the Congress, it will be done with wider consultations with the civil society. And they will also look at the already existing Rohith Vemula Acts, including the one which we have quoted in our story, one where the students and faculty members and all together came up with. So they will be looking at all this material, and each of the states will be drafting an act, and they will be introducing it in the state legislative assembly and will be passing it because they have the numbers, and then it will become a law. So that's the plan of action, is what I have gathered so far.
And lastly, Nikhila, speaking of implementation, could state laws like this clash with existing central laws like the SC/ST Act or the UGC rules?
No, I don't think that anything will clash with the existing acts, because the Prevention of Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Atrocities Act of 1989, the current Rohith Vemula Act, or the people who have been speaking for Rohith Vemula Act, have been saying that this act is in addition to that particular act. So there is no clash per se. It only strengthens or gives more teeth to some sort of systematic justice system to be there in university educational spaces, not just universities, but also higher educational institutions, school educational institutions, and almost every educational institution which is there in the country where students coming from historically marginalized backgrounds, take admission or attempt to take admission. So I don't think that there will be any clash per se, but it will only strengthen the existing laws which are in place to prevent atrocities against Dalit Bahujan Adivasi students and women on campuses.
In the end, we talk about India's crackdown on Pakistani YouTube channels. In the aftermath of the terror attack in Pahalgam, which claimed the lives of 26 people, the Indian government has intensified its media regulation efforts. In a coordinated move, the centre has blocked 16 Pakistani YouTube channels, including several prominent media outlets, and raised formal objections to foreign news organizations like the BBC, Associated Press, and Reuters over their reporting on Kashmir. The Indian Express's Mahendra Singh Manral and Divya A. report that the decision to block the channels was made based on recommendations from the Ministry of Home Affairs and implemented under India's digital security laws. According to the officials, the channels were found to be disseminating provocative content, false narratives, and misinformation about India's security agencies and their role in Kashmir. Now, among the blocked channels are Dawn News TV, Sama TV, ARY News, Geo News, Bol News, GNN, among others. Collectively, these 16 YouTube channels had amassed over 63 million followers, highlighting the audience reach that these platforms had within and outside Pakistan. The blocked pages, when accessed from India, now display a notice stating, "This content is currently unavailable in this country because of an order from the government related to national security or public order." Simultaneously, the Indian government has conveyed its strong concerns to the BBC over its reporting terminology. Sources indicated that BBC India described the Pahalgam attackers as militants in its coverage rather than using terms like terrorists. The government viewed this language as undermining the severity of the attack and misrepresenting the nature of the threat. Similar concerns have also been conveyed to the Associated Press and Reuters, two major international wire agencies, over what the government believes to be factually incorrect or imbalanced descriptions of security incidents in Kashmir. Another source told the Indian Express that several Pakistan URLs are duping Indians after claiming that they are collecting money for war, and the Ministry of Home Affairs, with the help of I4C, or the Indian Cyber Crime Coordination Centre, has blocked several URLs in the last 4 days. The source said that the centre has issued directions to all the ministries, departments and agencies to strengthen the cyber system and to prevent any cyber attack generated from the Pakistan-based hacker groups. Days after the terror attack in Pahalgam, the centre first announced suspension of visa services to Pakistan nationals and also asked states to identify people under 14 visa categories, including film, journalist, pilgrim, business, and ensure their prompt return. You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by Shashank Bhargava and me, Ichha Sharma. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.